The Backdoor GAA Podcast for 2023 is now brought to you by Steede Motor Group. For your personalised vehicle shopping experience, visit steedemotorgroup.ie. We are now delighted to announce our second sponsor of the podcast. Harper Finlay are a professional service recruitment company operating nationwide and are dedicated to helping people find their dream job.
So delighted now to be joined by Maurice Brosnan of the Irish Examiner to look ahead to this weekend's Connacht Final between Galway and Sligo, which is taking place in McHale Park on Sunday. A huge occasion for Galway and Sligo fans to look forward to this weekend. Are you looking forward to it, Maurice, or is there an element of this could get ugly?
That's a good question. Yeah, I suppose you don't want to be patronising either, Paul. I'm sure you're the same in a situation like this, but it is hard to see it being a distinctly competitive contest, which is a shame. I think that just the reality of, I don't want to drag us down this rabbit hole straight away, but it's the reality of the provincial structure when you've got 3 out of the 4 finalists, which could be one-sided enough, you know. So I think there's elements within it that should be look forward to seeing. There's players that I definitely would be look forward to seeing up close. I even just thinking from a Sligo perspective, someone like Luke Towie, since he's come off from Australia, has just gone from strength to strength. I think he scored in every game by one this year. His absolute powers out the back. A lot of people who would have watched the Galway Sigerson team would know Nathan Mullen well. He's a cracker coming forward from deep. So there's a lot of good players who'd be on display, but when you weigh up the two teams on paper, Galway are significantly stronger. So I don't know how competitive a game we're going to get, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, I think the thing from a Sligo perspective, it's not really ideal for them to be coming into this Connacht Final having played London and New York.
And that's the thing. I think that's a really important point. I did the Armagh Down game yesterday, and Ken McKeever was talking to us after, and he said, somebody asked him, how important do you think it is that you were a Division 1 team this year? And he said, I think that was the main gulf between the two teams there today, that Down were exposed to Division 3 teams, and the difference that makes just in terms of game management, game decisions, the reviews you get after losses, you just don't get that same exposure. That's why I honestly think it's one of the downsides. The league structure is great, but one of the downsides is the fact that the strong get stronger. You've got the same 8 or 9 teams who are always in Division 1, always exposed to each other, and that just, in a sense, it widens the gulf between them and the rest. So yeah, I think that's a huge aspect, is the fact that Sligo just haven't been exposed to teams at this level. I interviewed Niall Murphy a couple of years ago, and he actually told me that he learned loads out of that time when they were wiped by Mayo. And it was one of the more enjoyable games for him because he actually had more space, ironically. But they were absolutely wiped. So I think if they'd had exposed, even if they had one more competitive game, but unless we have a seeded Connacht, that's not going to happen. So we are where we are. Unfortunately, this is the downside of the current system as we have it. And yeah, from Sligo's perspective, that lack of exposure could prove costly. All right.
It's a bit of a pity that this game can't take place in Markievicz Park, because it could definitely add something to this Connacht Final, you feel. And I know it's provincial council saying that the capacity wouldn't fit this, but like, it's hard to know at the same time as well, would we get a bigger crowd to this Connacht Final? Yeah,
I'd be curious to hear your logic as to why you think it should be played in Markievicz Park. Just on the flip side, right? This debate has happened in a couple of scenarios. I think it might happen around the Leinster final with Louth and Dublin. There's no way that it will be played anywhere other than Croke Park, but there's a case that shouldn't be played there. It definitely happened in Munster when you look at Kerry and Clare being played in the Gaelic grounds, and there was a big push, even from within Clare, there was a big push to get that game into Cusack Park. And part of me thinks, if there's no home and away agreement, it's kind of patronising to a team to say, look at, Kerry need the best test possible. So for that end, it might be slightly more competitive if we put it in Cusack Park. I think we are where we are. Can you imagine, for example, if Cork came out and said we want to be more competitive, so we're going to play this game in Cork at Munster final? They'd be laughed out the gate. I think in elements of patrons, I totally see where you're coming from in terms of it might make the colour around it and the occasion a bit better, but I don't think, to be honest, I don't think that's the solution in this. I think the solution is to uproot the system, to be honest, and to get rid of the construction. That's not going to happen. I also don't think it's likely that they'd move these games out of where the biggest gate is guaranteed. So the only good thing from anybody's perspective, if you're thinking you might get in early because Galway and Mayo are playing beforehand in the RJFA game, that could be a right good game. Like, there's two competitive teams who know each other very well. Galway come back down after what was a disappointing enough league final. So there's a good curtain raiser which I think those games, the more we see them, the better. But as a package, I see where you're coming from. I just don't think it is the solution, if you know what I mean.
Wasn't it Sligo's turn though, or to get the last time they played in Pearse Stadium, and then obviously it was coming back then.
Yeah. So yeah, we had the Sligo were supposed to play the COVID year, and they pulled out that year. Yeah, I do. Home and away arrangements are different. Like I would fully concede that if there's a home and away arrangement, I fully see the logic of doing it that way. But by and large, I just don't see. I don't see that as a solution to make this game more attractive. I don't know how much more attractive it would become if it was played in American perspective. I could be wrong about that too. Like I could see it in that as well. But in my opinion, I just don't think that's the answer.
Yeah, it's a bio as well, as you said. You don't want to sound too patronising.
Exactly. Yeah.
Going into this, and we don't want to beat Galway up for it. But I need to ask you the question as well. Like, is there any slight chance for Sligo in this?
I would be the shock of all shocks. Like I mean, I'm not saying it's definitely not going to happen or anything like that as well. The one thing about Sligo, the one chance you would give them is that compared to any team in the Cavan might put this in from Division 3 as well, but in terms of any of the teams in Division 4, and they obviously came up from that, they are athletically, they're a good bit ahead of a lot of teams there. Like they have huge runners, so I don't think they'll fail as badly as, remember when Galway played Leitrim last year, and Leitrim were thereabouts for, I mean, I don't think a shock was necessarily on the cards, but they were pretty close for about 45-50 minutes, and then they just totally ran out of legs. And that was the day actually I thought McDade, it kind of kickstarted the season. I don't know if you remember that was, you're like, all right, he's more than well here now. Just suddenly he didn't start the game against Mayo in Michael Parker, ironically, before that. So from that perspective, I don't think you would have the same fear about that. But the point you made at the very start, Paul, I think is a very good one. What the Sligo have been exposed to this year, just I don't think is enough preparation when you're coming up against a top tier Division 1 team. So if I'm not saying it's totally about the realms of possibility, but a lot of strange things would have to happen. You would have to have red cards and huge degree of complacency, which I don't necessarily sense, and all sorts of other things for shocks beyond the cards. But now, who's to say that it won't come off? But yeah, it's hard to see it.
Just talking to Gary O'Donnell and Johnny Duane on the podcast last week, I made the point that Sligo's aim really is going to be containment in this first half. Galway's aim is probably going to be put the foot down straight away and put this game to Early's bed as quick as possible. Yeah,
I think that's a big thing when you're playing an underdog, is just to put football out of their heads, like try and take your chances early and not necessarily force it now, but just as soon as you can push. I got the sense I got if we compare it to yesterday, which was a Division 3 team, which Sligo are now, and against Armagh, who were a Division 1 team, now a Division 2 team. That was Armagh early on. We're like, we're going to try and go for goal here. They floated in 3 early balls, got nothing out of it, but it was very evidently get goals, put football out of their heads. I think that's the same sense you get from a Galway perspective. Sligo actually have the capability to grab goals too. Like we saw that definitely in Croke Park when they had the space against Wicklow. They really carved Wicklow open in the second half, and that, going back to that team from earlier, those runners from deep, that like they really do have the likes of Carabine and Paspalan and Mullen Towie can really punch holes. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try and they have to take those chances early. But from a Galway perspective, I think it is put the foot down, kind of gently squeeze the goal. I wouldn't be surprised, Paul, if we see a really controlled Galway to start. Like, we're not going to give you any avenues into this game. We're going to solely strangle you here and work it through that way. There's the distinct possibility that they're going on that way too.
Just on that control you mentioned, it was so evident in the first half with Galway against Roscommon, but then in the second half maybe we didn't see some control. Where do you feel Galway lost that control in that area against Roscommon, or do you think it was kind of more so going for it?
So I think what happened in that game was that a big team within Galway in the first half anyway was take the crowd out of it. Don't let the Rossies be the Rossies. Like, don't give them any chance to big roar. Be ultra control about our possession. So even if they were getting off kickouts, I disagree with some of the analysis around that. I don't necessarily think that was a press. I think that was Galway like, if we can win it, we will. But we're more than happy to let Carl finish on 100% here and have our set defence set. We won't be caught over the top the way Mayo were, for example. You know, David Burke is ultra big on this first phase thing, getting out for first phase. So from there up, I think that was why Galway went around it the way they did. And in the end, like, you know, so okay, Connacht was 100% of possessions. That's all on his kickouts. That's all well and good. But Galway actually scored more off his kickout than Roscommon scored off theirs. So, to my mind, that's a win. That's you've done your job in that respect. But just to go back to your question, I think it was control possession, take the crowd out of this, strangle them, take our chances. Don't give them any sort of avenues to get the crowd up and be on our backs and feel that pressure. And then suddenly, Ian Burke kicks that point in the second half. Carl gets a kick out off, and they just blitz them for 1-3 in that minute. And like football is a control game. A lot of people are giving out about how controlled it is now, but it's also a manic game. Like things can flip on a switch of a dime. For us, I thought Galway were the better team that day, but the decisive goal in that game is a shot. Dylan McHugh shot at a point that comes back off a post. There's no, you know, I don't know if Johnny Cooper wrote a great piece in the Irish Times this week about David Murray and what he did in that situation. 49 times out of 50, that's the perfect play. You know, you go side of your man, shot gets off, get out, get ready for a kick out, get possession, go up the other end of the field. It just so happens that one came back off the post and he was on the wrong side. But so I don't think it was. You can talk about systems and structures. I think part of it was just kind of a bit of a degree of kind of manatee, but overall, Galway were in control. They were the better team. There's no question about that.
Have you seen us evolve this year compared to last year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. Yeah, in a couple of different respects. So I think you're asking that question tactically. Yeah.
I'm just intrigued because last year it was highlighted so much of Kieran Malloy and Dylan McHugh as the double sweeper system. Maybe this year it doesn't seem at stages that Galway sometimes. We're obviously seeing John Daly maybe sit more in a deeper role.
Yeah, so there's two elements to that. I think I think the Galway that a lot of people were watching in the latter stages of the championship last year was different to the Galway that started the championship. If you go back to the Connacht final last year, and if you were at the game, like really analyse at the game, to my eye, Kenny McDade did not play midfield. He played as a wing back. Kieran Malloy was wing forward that day. Kieran Malloy was up the field and was dropping. So his job was, if there was a turnover there, he was dropping back ahead of the ball, trying to be that kind of like an outlet, but also kind of a mid-block press. The guy who could do that job very effective there. Tag any of these deep Roscommon runners, which that Anthony Cunningham team were very good at doing. They weren't necessarily as gung-ho. They were kind of like, even if you go back to the year before that in the rain, they were kind of a counter-attack team. That was what they built their game plan on. Now you could argue they've evolved since then too, but that's what I saw. The version of Galway I saw. As you mentioned, the two wing backs tucking in. That I saw that from the Armagh game, definitely in the Derry game, and it also to a certain extent against Kerry. But in an ideal sense, I think they're trying to free up John Daly. They're trying to that middle third is really important to them now. Like I think that's why Peter Cook, he's probably not the same Peter Cook we saw in Mike Cullen, in that he's not having the same impact going forward, but he does a huge amount of work. Like I think he's in there as kind of another big bodied middle third player that they're trying to evolve. This Galway, I think, are as close to, if you go back over Cian O'Neill teams, Cian O'Neill, right back to when he was at Mayo, he kind of had a basic tenet where, you know, they might give up their kick out. They actually won't always press kickouts, but when you get to the 45, they'll hit with a vengeance. Like they would really leave their mark. And I think, in my opinion, that's why Galway were so annoyed at the refereeing in the league final, because that was their game plan. Their game plan was, we just give some, definitely two soft frees, like the Tommy Conroy one and the second Aidan O'Shea one were wrong. Like that, I thought they were bad calls, but by and large, you could see some of them were 50-50. But this is as close to what Cian O'Neill wants, as far as I can see. It's we've got a very athletic middle third, a lot of good kick-out options if you want to go out that way. You can mix up your kick-out. You've got two good goalkeepers in that respect, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But you can free up your six when you can. Now, that's one thing you would stress, that sometimes it can be hard to see when you see a guy like Kieran Murtagh come into a game. I think psychologically for players, you kind of set to feel, oh, who's marking him? Whereas sometimes it can be actually part of the system. But so that's one evolution. But a more important evolution than that, and anything that happened tactically, I think, is what they're doing with their squad. Like just how they developed depth in basically every single line, like right from goalkeeper to their fullback line with Sean Fitzgerald and Johnny McGrath, the new boys who've come in wing back, John Maher, an unbelievable find in midfield, half forward line getting cut back as well, Ian Burke inside. Like every single line is now stronger than it was last year. And to my mind, that's a way more important evolution than anything they do tactically, because tactically they were in the Ireland final last year. There wasn't a huge amount of change that needs to happen there. The one downfall might have been the squad depth, and I don't think that's nearly as big a concern as it was.
The one area there you mentioned, John Maher coming in and being such a good find, and it's probably the most intriguing when people look at the Galway team, what it will be this weekend. What do you now do to introduce Killian McDade back into this team? Because you imagine he has to get in.
Yeah, that's a good question. If I was to ask you, Paul, what's your another final is on tomorrow? What's your starting midfield for Galway? I'm going to flip this question on you.
Yeah, like it's a difficult one, but I'd probably go along the lines at the minute of probably John Maher and Paul Connery, and I'd probably look at Killian McDade at 7.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna disagree with you. I'd go Maher and McDade, and I'd bring Conroy on for the last 20. That's I think.
Yeah, like it's.
I think you could then. The one thing about Paul Conroy is that sometimes I think he fades from games slightly. That's what happened in the Ireland final. On the flip side, you could take advantage of that. Like this is a guy who likes to get forward, who can shoot from deep. I think he would be a nightmare to see him coming on with 20-25 minutes left. I think you could do what John Maher is doing, which is absolutely empty the tank. Like if you give him that trust to say, listen, run yourself into the ground the way you have been doing, and if you're gone by 40-45 minutes, stick the hand up and we can pull you. But I think that's a really athletic middle third. Then if you had Maher and McDade, I think they'd be good foils for each other. Actually, if you need somebody to do the midfield comparison I'm going to make here is Kerry. Like if you need somebody to do the Jack Barry role, which is follow Fenton every inch on the pitch, John Maher has demonstrated he can now do that as well. So I think that's what I would do. I don't know if that's going to happen this weekend now, but from a long-term perspective, I that could be the midfield partnership. But this goes back to our point at the very start. It's nice to have options, and it's important to have options. Like McDade at 7 is definitely a liable option. That would be an absolute nightmare. Can you imagine if you're a wing forward and you come out to see him there? You're in for
really similar to Gavin White, really, when you look at it.
Yeah, and a big thing I've noticed this year is that I think teams are going to, because you get this stage now where basically 99 out of 100 attacks look the same. Like you've kind of got a bit of a stalemate where you have 15 players behind the ball, and as is often happening now, 15 players kind of attacking around the edges of that. Because all that space is so clogged, when you're deeper, you're close to your goal. A guy who can come and punch holes and score is invaluable. Go back, you watched Derry at the weekends. So like a lot of people are talking about Shane McGuigan scoring 9 points. Callum McCluskey coming from deep, he's in a great attacking option. McGrugan is an unbelievable shooter for them now. Lee Gannon does it for Dublin. Thomas Sullivan had 8 score involvements against Tipperary, a really defensive Tipperary. That's the guy coming from deep, kind of punching that hole. McDade, as he demonstrated against Armagh, is well able to shoot from range last year. So him coming and kind of punching that, that's the only small criticism you could have of Galway's deeper options is there's not a huge scoring threat. Like Dylan McHugh gets some amount of assists. Like he really is good for that. And so you wouldn't be too critical of him in an attacking sense, but you would like to see maybe another scoring threat there, just in terms of, I think it would it'd be another weapon in what is a pretty impressive arsenal.
Yeah, and even just listening back to John Maher after the Roscommon game, his attitude just seems like it's spot on at the minute. When he was asked about the Enda Smith man-making role, and he just didn't really faze him. He said it was just for him, and it kept it simple for him.
Yeah, it's so like I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and it's something that I tossed around in my head the last while. If you go back to the league final this year, and when myself was on this podcast with Mr. O'Para, and you asked to us, who do you see be inviting to this panel? And I said at the time, I think John Maher should be brought in, and that was in my head. And then about a week later, Galway announced their sponsorship with Supermax. They were extending that deal, and Pádraig Royce was up doing a press conference, and I had asked who was invited in, and he mentioned John Maher, and so I kind of probed that a small bit to say, this is a guy who, as we've talked about a lot now, made his debut against Mayo, was taken off last time. We weren't sure if we'd see him again. And he made a point of saying, no, I heard at the start of this year, John O'Mahony, my former manager, came to me and said he is determined to get back in here. So he had his attitude was set in stone. From then on, I'm going to have a good club season. I'm going to use that as my chance to get back in with Galway. And I think that, whatever you want to call it, that resolve, the kind of the fortitude that he determined, their resilience, whatever word you want to call it, from that point to get to where he was, like even his most ardent supporters wouldn't have seen John Maher going to the level he got now, where a lot of people were plucking him for man of the match, and Connacht semi-final. You could have seen him maybe coming on. He didn't play. Like first league game this year against Mayo, Galway ended up throwing it away and drawing that game. He's out in the field doing the sprints after. He doesn't even get minutes that day. Comes on against Donegal, starts to look a bit more comfortable. Was great against Tyrone and Tuam. That was the day.
Barra was ahead of him at the start of the year, really.
Yeah, but justifiably. Like there was I don't think, but it's just that. I think it's just that grind. That grind. I'm going to keep working. You see that in his play. Like he just does not take a step back. He's totally comfortable with that. It's a real selfless role. I think a guy who can do that and just follow a guy to the end of the earth. Pierce, I was in it, as I mentioned, I was at down in Armagh yesterday, and Pierce Laverty, just watching him was Turbot and just determined that, I'm going to do my role here, I'm going to follow you everywhere, just totally cancel you out. There is kind of there's an element of that, because you can be so tempted to switch off for a second, and if you do, you're punished, which the quality of players we're talking about here. So yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. As much as like physically he's just a prime athlete. He looks like he's been exposed to intercounty football for the last few years, but there is definitely there's an attitude or kind of a resolve there as well that would have you fairly encouraged.
Just with that, when we're talking about midfield options, do you see any changes this weekend from the Roscommon game?
It's hard to say. It's a good question. So part of me thinks no, but so this goes back to your point at the very start about not being patronising. So you don't want to be patronising, but in an ideal sense, if Galway are looking at a comfortable victory here, you would like to get a lot more minutes into McDade, for example. I think that would be the kind of priority. Guys who need football. So you can do that one of two ways. You can start them and then pull them after 40, or you can bring them on at half time. Now, I should stress, I'm not saying this is going to be a run out for Galway. You're going to treat it like a challenge game, but a small factor has to be that we got to get more exposure, get him up to level playing field, because there are guys who need football. I thought it was interesting when we asked Shane Walsh after the league final about the missed frees. He put that down to rustiness. Now, that is a totally, some people will raise their eyebrows at that, but it's totally understandable that you'd be rusty in the league final when you consider that he was late coming back. So you just need to get up to speed. So in that vein, I don't think, even if McDade had 70 minutes in the Connacht final, I don't think he'd iron out all that rustiness, or I don't think he'd be totally up to speed. But it's a good step in that direction. So that has to be a factor. But just purely take the game on its merits, go win it, and then you can deal with that stuff after. I wouldn't foresee many changes, no.
Point was raised last week on the podcast with Maurice, just about Damo and Shane together. Like, if you look back at games, it's nearly been one's performed well and the other's been minimised. And it's a fair point when you do look back over Galway's games.
Yeah, it is. And it's a bizarre kind of quirk. Particularly, last year was just so apparent that if one of them played well, the other didn't. The only day that both of them played well, I thought last year, was the Connacht final, was against Roscommon. Yeah. They were both excellent that day. Coleman came off injured towards the end of that game with his ankle, but that day I thought they both played really well. But from that point on, against Armagh, Coleman was excellent. Shane was kind of minimised. His big day obviously was Derry, and then Shane was just sensational in the All-Ireland final. I think partly that is to do with, as well, is that, Paul, if one is being cancelled out, there's more freedom for the other. That's the benefit of having a dual threat. But in similar vein, you would love to see the two of them being influential together. To be honest, I don't think it's about both stay up or both kind of work in tandem. I think it's what's facilitated around that. And within that conversation, a crucial player is Ian Burke. Like, he could absolutely make both of them tick. The fact that he's included, I thought, was pretty interesting. It didn't quite work out then, but if there was scope to see that, I think that developing, it's going to be a trio, would be very exciting. So this weekend, I don't think there's as big a threat of the two of them being limited, but it is definitely one to watch as the year goes on.
With them trio as well, like, all those players offer something completely different. Like, there's not one of those players that offer the exact same.
Yeah, which is a lovely benefit to have. And I have to say, like, I do think that you got a natural ball winner in Damien. The two of them can link up pretty well, like, in terms of facilitating each other. Remember the points Damien Coleman kicked against Kerry when he came on into the opposite of the Oris end in
Yes,
Stadium.
yes. Shane
Kicked Shane Walsh kicked the ball in. When I saw that, I was thinking, I wonder if Shane was on the 40 and Damien was inside, that kind of partnership, would that work well?
Is that something, we're just looking at the wing forward line and you're looking at it this year, it's very clear with Cook and Matty Tierney that it's up and down and trying to contribute a score or two as well. And we all know Johnny Heaney's role, so then it's where does Shane fit in there?
Yeah, that's it exactly. And I think that just to go back to that point, I think that the reason that Shane Walsh isn't doing that is because Johnny Heaney is such a good score contributor in that role anyway. Like, you look at the first half in Dark Pride Park, he just makes Galway tick. Like, he gives that the kick pass for Damien's goal chance that ends up in a point. He kicks the first point, gives the hand pass for Damien's very last one before half time. He was just, his fingerprints were all over that. He does that facilitator role very well, and he's a dog for work. Like, he just he's so, in terms of that kind of half forward player who's going to track back and put in the, whatever you want to call it, the hard yards, he's primed for that. So that suddenly means that you're trying to fit in is the wrong word, but you're trying to facilitate Shane Walsh within all of that. So but as it happens, he ends up doing this kind of 15 role and floating. In an ideal sense, maybe he would like to get him closer to goal. The only potential fix is that one thing he's really good at, like, he won't rest on his laurels to try and force himself into a game. And part of it, and he has referenced this a couple of times as well, might be just like staying inside, waiting it out, having that to be a patience where I might not get a touch here for 10 or 15 minutes, but when I get my chance, I'm going to take it. But like, it's not a simple thing either. The way Gaelic football is now, it's very hard to get a guy who is going to get the freedom to stay up the whole time. The reason Damien Coleman were so good against Derry last year was because he was able to do that. He was the one guy who was going to be left up, who wasn't going to be dragged back. But if he's going to be doing that, you can't have two doing it. It just naturally happens that one ends up relatively displaced. But I would stress too, by the way, even though they're not, maybe it's not to the heights that you would ideally want, but as well as like one is ultra firing, I wouldn't say on those other days the other is necessarily not playing well. It's not. I don't think it's a major issue.
100%.
I thought against Armagh last year, for example, Shane Walsh put in a savage hard work. He did the exact same thing against Mayo the first day in McHale Park. Like, if he is forced to do that job, he will do it. There's no fear of that at all. So I don't think it's, to any extent, it's
more so from a scoring sense, really.
Exactly. Yeah. You're 100% spot on. Like, it's not from a game sense, and from what he contributes, you'd still be relatively happy. You'd just be, when you see an All-Ireland final, you're okay. Could we get that plus what we saw from Damien in the Hyde last week? But if you compare the both of them together, it would be a fairly formidable partnership.
Just before as well, we do get into matchups and the game itself on Sunday. The goalkeeping situation is highlighted. There's so much noise around it. Probably is hard for management to block it out in one sense, because it's the most talked about position in Galway football at the minute. Bernie Power obviously comes in, plays his second game of the year against Roscommon. You presume Bernie Power is going to stay, because if they were to change again, then this could really affect the team in some sense.
Yeah, I'm not fully sure. I think Galway have been scarred by 2019, 2018, when we were chopping and changing goalkeepers frequently. A goalkeeper would be named and would then change before throw-in, and that seemed to have a pretty big impact on their subsequent performance. I think back to the Mayo, the very final game of the Kevin Walsh year, the Mayo game in Limerick, when Lavelle was named to start, Brendan Power came in and might not have gone as well. And this is a different situation to me. I think these two goalkeepers are in good form and who have both got relative strengths and weaknesses. I also think sometimes there's a trap that you would fall into when you're looking at a position where you put all the blame on the goalkeeper for a kick out. Like, I don't think Galway's kick out was that more efficient, or any more efficient really, against Roscommon than it had been with Conor Gleeson. So that's, to me, that would suggest it's not actually about the goalkeeper. It's a broader system there. James Horn wrote a great piece for a small plug for the Examiner here. James Horn wrote a great piece for the Examiner after that game, and the thing he was most critical of was Galway's setup on draw kick out. He was very praiseworthy of their performance, but he definitely said, when you're going back to that punch and break thing, that's a desperation. That means that nothing else is working. It's basically like break glass in case of emergency plan, and that's what Galway ended up doing that day. So I don't, if you're pointing the finger of blame at, as often happens, as I'm sure you hear too, at Bernard, or sorry, at Connacht Gleeson for that, then I think you're backing up the wrong tree. At the same time, in a pure football sense here, this is what this has to be. Like, it has to be a football decision, two good options. There's absolute merits to sticking with Bernard Power. He has been a very good player for Galway for a very long time. There's pluses and minuses within that too. Like, I think Connacht Gleeson got absolutely no credit for the save he made from James Carr in the league final in Croke Park this year, but I thought that was an absolutely brilliant save too. So I think it's a closer call than it has been portrayed in places. But I also think while Power has a jersey, you can stick with it. In saying that, I don't know, Paul. Like, I'd be curious to hear why you think it would unsettle the team, because there are two good options, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if they were to go back to Gleeson, for example.
Are you not changing though your kick-out style then, if you look, because Gleeson is obviously this long kick-out. Comer comes past 11 and he tries and hits him a lot. You often see Gleeson go long when he's in goals. Power then seems to be more comfortable kicking out to the wings, pinpoint kicking. But like, at the same time, I do agree with you. I don't think there's a whole lot between. Other people might think different, but I don't think there's that much between Bernie Power and Conor Gleeson.
Yeah, and just to build on that, if you go back to the final round of the league when Bernie Power played, I thought his kickouts were good that day. A quirk of that is that is the least kickouts Galway retained in the entire league was against Kerry that day. Kerry, their press is renowned, like they're so good at it, and they found it pretty hard to get out. But and Bernie Power was really good at those kind of short clipped ones. Conor Gleeson was really good at that in the All-Ireland final last year. Like, he has shown the capability to do that. It was pointed out to me recently that at times in the league against Roscommon in the league this year, Conor Gleeson kicked with his left and right foot. So if you've got a press on, it's a really difficult thing to press a guy if he can kick off both sides, because you're trying to read his body position and try and anticipate which side he's going. So if he can go left or right, it's a harder thing to do. So, but like, I do see what you're saying. The only thing I would kind of say in response to that is that if the kick-up plan was ultra perfect right now, I wouldn't temper or with a good thing. But the fact that it still is what's that coach and speak, or work on, maybe there's a case there that you can continue to do a bit of experiment.
Because it made me think after the league final, when Bernie Power started against Roscommon and he played, it just made me think in my head, were we trying to hold something back in that league final then by not playing him in goals then when he played the Roscommon game? Yeah,
potentially. And did you see any evidence of something they were holding back against Roscommon in the?
Not really. Nothing that you could say that you could, but yeah, it's a fascinating one. Will you stick with Power this weekend, or what would you do?
I think so. Yeah, I think you're trying to, just in the vein of what we're talking about here, it's something that you need to kind of iron out, and I'm sure it's something that they've done countless amount of work on. It's probably the one thing you'd have high on the list of things that need to be fixed after Roscommon. So I think stick with it, try and iron out a slightly better system than what's there, and see where you're at after that.
Something actually with Sligo, I was watching back their New York game there now, and obviously it was a bit of a mismatch. They win that 2-16 to 6 points. But the Sligo kick out from David Phillips has actually really impressed me. His variety in his kickouts. He can go pretty long as well. It's actually something, I don't know, is an area they're going to target this weekend, but their kickouts this year have looked good.
And on the flip side of that, their press is really good. Like, if you go back to the league final, like O'Toole and Healy for Wicklow have been really good. They're in midfield, they're really good options. Wicklow absolutely annihilated Leitrim when they pressed them in the league this year. Just a really aggressive press. Leitrim could not get out that day. Now, Nevin O'Donnell wasn't playing in goals for that game, but they could not get out. And Sligo absolutely took that away from them. But just to go back to something we were saying earlier, Paul, I think a big, I don't disagree with you in the slightest. The fact that you haven't been able to road test that against a better quality of opposition is such a major. Like, I think you learn so much more from when things go wrong as opposed to when they're going right. That if you're trying to iron out some kinks, or even just the psychological pressure of when you've got that press and you've lost 2 or 3 in a row. I thought actually you saw evidence of that I know it's a Division 3 team against a Division 2 team. You saw evidence of that in Croke Park yesterday when Louth got that press on and Duffy couldn't get out. And it was definitely felt like there was a bit of a bit of a panic going through Offaly at that stage, where it just wasn't clicking. They didn't have that, break glass in case of emergency. We're going to chip one to the corner. We're just going to try and win this, slow down the game, whatever it takes. But I do think if you haven't been able to road test that, it is such a massive disadvantage.
It's a big week though for Sligo when you think of it. I was just thinking, have they ever had a better week for Sligo football when you consider Connacht Final Sunday and the All Ireland Under-20 semi-final on Saturday?
Yeah, and you could build that out to a big year when you look at what went on in the schools and their success last year as well. I have to say, what the most enjoyable game that I've covered this year was the Connacht Under-20 final. The atmosphere of that was absolutely electric. Like, just from a tune was rocking. You couldn't begrudge Sligo a day like that. Like, they travelled in huge numbers. They were in great voice in the crowd. They got massive support on that team. A lot of players who are still underage next year, which I think is you'd be fairly optimistic for what's coming. So yeah, the county is on a high. I do wonder, like, worst case scenario, this is absolutely worst case scenario. Would Sligo have been better off with all that goodwill of getting a run in the Tattler Cup, and if they'd been able to bring even more silverware back, you could have really added to it.
You're just wondering what this defeat could do for the rest of Sligo.
Or if you build that out as well, Paul, like, what if they were to, if they were to get a bad group in the Sam Maguire, like a tough group, like I think it would be a poor enough way for the year to end. Like, I think being the only Division 3 team, is going to be pretty difficult anyway. And then you put in on top of that Westmeath as well, I suppose, but you put in on top of that what coming off the back of a loss here might do. I think it's a tough challenge. Now Sligo have been fairly consistent about this, that they want the chance to expose that to them. As I said, I think athletically they're the pick of the bunch in terms of teams who would be capable of doing that. So there's that side of it too, and I'm sure, like, if there's another side to that as well, where if you were competitive in one of those games, if you did get a big day out, to get one of those teams down to Markievicz Park and get their the cut around that, I'm sure would be a big deal too. So there's pros and cons to that. That's the ironic thing about this new structure, is that a lot of it will remain to be seen, and there'll be a lot of hindsight analysis. The truth is, we don't know. Like, we don't know if the structure will be a total dud or if it will actually take off. The GAA have been very adamant that the reason that they had 3 teams going through is that they addressed the issue with Super 8. We had a lot of dead rubbers in the final round. So there's mathematically there will be something to play for no matter what come the final day. That's what they're trying to do. Is that a good idea? We're all going to be experts in hindsight when it actually happens. But in terms of theory, it sounds kind of reasonable to me. I can see the logic to that. So maybe it would be a great thing for Sligo to get the exposure, to get a couple of competitive games, to run close, to make, if they could sneak a win, that would be absolutely unreal. There's that side of it too, I suppose.
Yeah, you just worry with a pot one who Sligo could end up with, or if they do lose this weekend. Now, I don't want to be saying writing them off completely, but that pot 3 as well it does look pretty strong when you consider Mayo, Roscommon, Tyrone, and Monaghan in there too.
Yeah, it does, and so part of that within that too is that if you're the only kind of small semblance of positive within that is that the order of these fixtures have been predetermined. So for anybody who doesn't know, this draw is going to happen tomorrow afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, and the order of these draws has been predetermined. So the first round of fixtures is the first seed against the third seed, which means the second seed against the fourth seed. So theoretically, I'm doing a lot of projecting here, but theoretically, if Sligo are the second seed, they should have the softest is the wrong word, the easiest game. They will play the fourth seed first, so it should be the most winnable game in their group, theoretically. So you're not starting off with what could be a potentially tricky fixture. That's the great irony, is that if they beat Galway, they could end up starting off with a trip to again against Mayo or Tyrone to kick things off. But if you're a second seed, you play the fourth seed first. That's the way these fixtures are being drawn.
Okay, yeah, so that could work in the favor. Just on that, because I'm actually not aware myself, when is it this All Ireland series gets underway?
So we've got the Connacht and Munster are going to be out the first week. So we're going to play the Printer finals this weekend. You've got the other game, Printer finals, next weekend. the Connacht and Munster, which will be teams that will be determined this weekend, they'll be in action the following weekend. So, and then we're going to be in a 2v2. So one of the things that I was thinking about this today now, actually, because of kind of anticipation of the draw.
Yeah.
One of the things that could be great is that if we kicked off that weekend with a couple of blockbuster games, so like I'm just throwing this total hypothetical, like, but if you just humor me here for a second, if, for example, the opening game of this, Kieran McIver is calling it the Super 16s tomorrow. I hope that doesn't catch on. So I'm going to call it the Sam Maguire series. If the opening of Sam Maguire is a seed 1 versus seed 3, can you imagine if it was Galway Mayo in Pearse Stadium to kick this off at the start? I think that would be great. We'd have absolutely no fear. Galway Tyrone would be brilliant, yeah. But that game, the reason I like the idea of the Galway Mayo game is that both teams will go gung ho for that game. That Mayo are coming off this big long gap. They want to win it. Galway at home, there's absolutely no way they lie down for that. So you have no fears of the big fear I think a lot of people have with this system is that you might see teams pick and choose their battles. I don't know if that'll happen now, but I think that's a fear that people have within this structure. So if you got that first game, the first launch should be a blockbuster game. Fingers crossed, it should be. I got Tyrone or Mayo, for against Galway at the start would be a nice one to kick it off.
Yeah, I just said it so much about this All-Ireland series, about 3 teams coming out of a group, and that's why it feels like, to me, the championship doesn't necessarily get underway until the preliminary quarterfinals. Now, there's value for winning an Ulster title, don't get me wrong, but I just think 3 teams coming out of a 14 group is absolutely madness.
Yeah, so I'm not going to I totally get what you're coming from. And structurally, I think it probably doesn't make sense, but I do think, right, I just make this point briefly. Sometimes people talk about this and they talk about it as if the association or the people making these decisions are kind of dinosaurs and they haven't thought this through and that kind of thing. And I can just tell you, like, from my experience and my work, that could not be further from the truth. Like, a lot of people involved in this are very intelligent people. They've put a lot of thought into it, rightly or wrongly now. So I think structurally, I can see value as to trying to keep something on the line for that final round of games. Like, I can see why you want to try and build that in for competition. Now, as I say, that only works if you've got a competitive group of 4 evenly matched teams. The problem comes if there's a lopsided group, and then you could definitely.
I just think in 3 groups you could have dead rubbers by the end of this, and that's why.
And I actually think the problem is that in some of these groups you could have. I won't draw the team here now, but you could have an identifiable weak link who all 3 teams know, right, that's to win that game and we're relatively safe. And then it takes out the meaning of the other games that could be great. Do you know what I mean? So let's say, for example, if you were Dublin and we're in a group and they had a Donegal or whoever within that as well, a team who they had a bit of sense about, right, that's not as important a game. Dublin's game then against whoever the second or third seed is becomes less important because they know no matter what, we're still okay. That's in the back of your mind. That's the threat to that. So that's the structural thing. I'm going to make this point. It's a total tangent, but I'm thinking about it a lot when I heard Glenn Ryan speak yesterday. Structurally, I do think this has been well thought out, and I think the people who have made this decision know what they're doing. There's a PR battle here too. People have to believe in this. They want to sell it. As you mentioned there, a lot of people feel like the championship won't start until the preliminary quarterfinals. So within that, there's a couple of really easy wins. And the easiest win, I'm just saying this, the easiest win from the GA's perspective is do not give Dublin 2 home games. Don't put them in Croke Park twice. I can foresee how annoying people are going to be back. They're going to lose faith in it immediately if they see that. I got this sense. I'm going to
agree down the country. Do you agree with Glenn Ryan?
I think it's a definite point. Yeah, I think it's a definite point. I think a lot of managers don't come out and say it for understandable reasons and that they don't want to see it. But there just has to be a inbuilt competitive advantage. I mean, you're familiar with your surroundings. That's just a fact. Like, I don't know how anybody is necessarily going to dispute that. I should stress now. I think I would say Dublin would be open to, if they were approached about this, they'd be open to playing that neutral game in a home in a genuinely neutral venue, not in their home venue. Like, if you were to say it, like, I meet Dublin fans a lot and they love the trip down to Portlaoise, to Laois, whatever. They got a kick out of that. I think they would be open to the idea of, like, just for example, if you, instead of playing a game in a soulless Croke Park for that neutral game, bring it to Clones, bring it to Westmeath, like bring it to Portlaoise again. Like you've got great options there to get on the road, to get a buzz around it. I think that would win people over. I do.
Sending it to a county that isn't necessarily, I don't know, if they were to play in Dr. Cullen Park or something, say, for instance, like what that could do for Carlow could be huge, like for the younger generation.
Yeah, so I just think it's a simple thing, but it's a big thing too. I do think that within this conversation, there's part of the problem with the Super 8s wasn't actually the structure of the Super 8s. For donkey's years, people have been crying out for some sort of version of that. Maybe not that exact version. You ideally might have that Champions League format at the very start of your year, but something like that. Part of the problem with that was that Dublin were so strong at the time that they made you had those dead rubbers at the end, and on top of that, then you had games in. I remember covering it. They played Roscommon in an absolutely half-empty Croke Park, and it was kind of mind-numbing. And to have that at what should feel like the business end of the championship season was very frustrating. So I just think it's a small, easy win that you could make to just put that game in a neutral venue, and you would avoid so much of the tedious debate and all the stuff that's going to come if they end up giving them home games. So we won't know, as far as I understand, the fixtures won't be confirmed until Friday. The draw is tomorrow, but the fixtures won't be confirmed until a couple of days later. So we won't know where those games are tomorrow. And that's as far as I understand. They might be wrong. Maybe they'll announce them all tomorrow, but we will find out, I think, this week where those games would be. And I think it would be a very good thing if Dublin only had one game in Croke Park.
Absolutely, and it's probably not Dublin's fault either that these games are being fixed for Croke Park.
Big time, yeah.
I think that's a lot of people point fingers and stuff. But just getting back to this game, if you're to look at Sligo's matchups this weekend, Comer and Walsh, we've talked about the fulcrum of the Galway attack. Like, who picks them up from Sligo, or what do they do here if they're to kind of frustrate Galway?
One of our lines could take, you know what, I did just scope through both there, but I don't know what they're going to do about Damien Comer. I think that is a real.
This kind of seems like Aidan O'Shea 2015 with Mayo, where they weren't able to handle him. Yeah,
great comparison, really good comparison. I might still laugh at my copy, you know. I think they just don't have physically. I just think it's a really difficult thing to get that matchup right, and particularly the form he's in. So
particularly Paul McMahon at 6 for Sligo, he likes to sit as well, but I just think that's something Sligo can't do this weekend, because even you look back to the weekend with Monaghan, I just thought what they did and sit back, they just kind of sat back and they avoided on pressure. I think that's something Sligo cannot afford to do this weekend.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this a lot. I don't think if you look at this Sligo team, there's nobody that stands out that you would say physically could go and wrestle with him. So trying to convert somebody to do that, I think you're after a loser straight away. I think you're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. I don't think that would work. I think the thing to do is do what Kerry did. Kerry could have sent Tyke Morley after Damien Comer when he came on. Easily could have said, we're going to send like a big physical presence in and we'll see can he rest for him. And they didn't. Instead, they tried to send Jason Foley in there. Somebody would get out in front, try and deny ball in hand. If he has ball in hand, you're not going to go resting him. You might stand off and try and double up and get help. So in that vein, I think there's a case that Nathan Mullen could do that. Now, the only thing on that, right, I think he's a huge addition going forward. So if that happens, you're robbing yourself to a certain extent. But
is Luke Towey someone?
I don't think so. I don't. I think Luke Towey as a 7 is such a huge threat for him. He's athletically, he's so good going forward. This guy who has the athletic profile. Luke Towey could be their Killian McDade. Like, he genuinely could be. He's an absolute freak runner. His 20 meters dash time when he went to Australia. He went to the Gold Coast Suns, spent 2 years there. Has benefited from exposure to a pro environment. I think if you want to have any semblance of a attacking structure in this game, you kind of need him in your halfback line and trying to punch holes. Luke Towey is a potential, in a sense, if you're Johnny Heaney fit, I think Johnny Heaney would actually be the pick of the half forward line from a Galway perspective. You'd want on Luke Towey, because Luke Towey will absolutely run out. Now Tierney and Cook will go with him, but he's got raw pace too. Like, he has got real top end elite raw pace as well. So I think it would be a mistake if you pull him out of there to send him back after Comer. The big thing I think, actually, Paul, regardless of who the one-on-one matchup is that it can't be a it can't be a one-on-one matchup. It can't be a sole battle. You need to try and give some assistance, particularly kind of in front of him. Ideally trying to deny Galway the kick passing option so that they're not actually kicking ball in and they're getting pressure out the field. I think it's a systematic thing rather than a one-on-one matchup, because regardless of who goes in there physically, it's just going to be a mismatch.
I think with the midfield as well, Cian Lally and Paul Kilcoyne, they're two huge men, but just athletically wise, I'm just not sure will they have it when you talk about the athleticism in Galway's middle third.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, I do think that Sligo have enough athleticism elsewhere that might be able to pose some sort of a problem. So, like, if they could get a punch with, Pat Blanc, his form was kind of patchy throughout the league, and now suddenly he seems to be coming right back into it. So someone like that, Caravine has been, I know he's in sensational form as well. I think that they're more relying on them to give them that avenue into the game. I also think, they're two absolute workhorses from Galway, but in terms of that kind of like raw punching power, you wouldn't necessarily have as big a worry from Sligo from a Galway perspective. The big thing is someone like John Maher, who's going to go all day. He'll end up finding those pockets of space that he has done a couple of times this year. And, you could well see him, if he starts notching over a couple of points as well. But yeah, I think they have. I wouldn't, if you were to weigh up these 15s, I wouldn't be saying athleticism is a major concern from a Sligo perspective. Maybe in that one matchup, all right, but they have enough elsewhere to compensate.
If we're to look at Galway from a defensive perspective, in that full forward line, Paddy O'Connor, Pat Spillane, Niall Murphy, there's height in there. And do you expect Sligo to go with the long ball early on in this 15 minutes, or is there a risk in doing that? Because then if they get turned over on the counter,
I don't think they will, and I think Spillane will end up playing out around the middle third anyway. He won't in there. You very easily see one of Galway's starting back three end up being freed up. Sean Kelly is the designated man marker. It would be a curious thing if you managed to have him as the free man, and the punching power that he would have going the other way. It would be Oh, they have to. Like, that's the thing from a Galway perspective. Number one man marker.
Dylan do it that day in the height. So it's just fascinating to see. Is this going to be a common team every game?
But that's from a defensively, you can dictate your matchups. That's kind of an obvious thing, right? So that's from a Galway perspective. If you're saying to 15s come out and Sean Kelly runs over to Niall Murphy, immediately you're like, Sligo thinking, how can we get Niall off him? Or B, who's going to track Sean Kelly when he goes the other way? Because you do not want, if Sligo end up in a scenario like Monaghan did last weekend, where Conor McManus is the one-on-one defender with a cornerback, straight away you would be relatively fearful. Niall Murphy's a great athlete, but you want him exerting himself up the other end of the field. So it's a curious thing when you've got a guy who's the furthest away from your goal and you're starting to worry about how are you going to stop him. It's an even more curious thing to think about, like the long-term future, and where, if, as we hear, Mulcairn and Malloy are back training, and in an ideal scenario, if they had no setbacks, where does Sean Kelly end up? Where's his long-term future? Like, is it at 3? Is it maybe one line forward? But yeah, I think regardless of how that matchup goes, I think Galway, they seem to have a thing where he's our designated man marker. We send him after the best forward, therefore he's going after Niall Murphy. But that poses more difficulties to Sligo. Then you wouldn't have a huge amount of concerns from a Galway perspective that way.
I think for Galway, it's just going to be very much the players who line out in those positions that'll mark whoever's there.
Yeah, by and large, yeah. I don't see them, necessarily bending over to bend out of shape to match up with Sligo or anything like that. I do think that they'll stick to the kind of same principles that they had against Leitrim last year. That game to me is kind of demonstrative of what Galway will do. Like, it's a more of a control. We're going to pick you apart piece by piece here. We'll take our opportunities. We're not going to force this. It was very kind of methodical in what they did here, not trying to just ultra control. We're going to put football out of our heads. We're going to go hard from the start here. Keep kind of not obviously tapping over scores. That's the way that I would foresee it playing out. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think. I don't know. Nothing comes out of this camp. We don't know what's going on this week, but I don't think Galway are working on setting up to mirror Sligo on Sunday anyway.
Yeah. Do you know, when you talk about Galway's depth, and that's been one of the most impressive things overall for you, is it even more impressive when you consider the first league game this year? Neil Mulcahy and Owen Kelly started in the full back line, and they looked really, really impressive. And then you talk there about Malloy and Sean Mulcairn. All those 4 players are on the comeback, but there's no set dates on when they'll be back, and they all look like players who could contribute. But when you consider the depth that's been brought into that back line, and then 4 players are on the comeback now.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Galway actually have I think they have a lot of interchangeable is the wrong word, but they have a lot of players who you could swap them in and out, and you wouldn't have a great amount of fears about seeing them play. Like Daniel O'Flaherty came on for a minute in the Hyde. We haven't seen him much in championship football. But when you go back to that day, your reference in Mayo, he was brilliant. Totally held his own. You wouldn't have no major concerns if he was called upon to slot in if you got an injury to any of that kind of the wing back options there. So that's what I mean. I think it's options where there's not, you've got like for like replacements, guys who could slot in, do a very similar job. You're not bending yourself out of shape to get them in. You've got I kind of go back to that final 20 minutes against Kerry. I go back to that a lot, and I just think about if you had, if you had 2 of them back, like if you had Peter Cook and Ian Burke in that scenario, what a difference that would have made to Galway. And it's not just about them 2 being recalled; it's what they've developed below that as well, which is a major plus. And then you look beyond that and you see, like I kind of biases aside here, like I think 2 of my own clubmen in Chafford Sterling and Keane Hernan have had great years so far. You would have no fears if they were called upon to slot into either line either. The same, you could probably argue for goals. James Keane was held in pretty high regard in that dressing room last year. He's a third choice there. So there's great options basically as you move. I said this at the start, move throughout the lines. The only thing is this is the same for every other team. The one thing that would really hurt you is if one of your critical players, if a Sean Kelly, if a Damien Comer, then suddenly you have to worry, because if Kerry got an injury to David Clifford, you can talk about depth all you want. That is a colossal loss, and the same is true if either of the boys were to be injured. So that's not about depth. That's just about a huge blow to a key player, and there's not much you can do to prepare for that.
Something with this week to motivate Galway, but they won't have to get up for too much. It's still a Connacht final at the end of the day, but particularly for the players who've been in this panel for quite a while now, back-to-back Connacht titles hasn't been something that's happened for quite a while.
And what I find interesting, that's a great question. Like, one thing I find interesting is that, so in a couple of I do a podcast with the Irish Examiner, and on that podcast, James Horn said a couple of weeks ago that when he did a post-match press conference, he was almost exclusively talking to his players. He was considered what he said, and what any message he wanted to get to his players was what he was doing in his post-match press conferences. And Derek McGrath wrote a column last Saturday, and he said the exact same thing, that when he went out, he was trying to speak to his players. He drew the line with John Kiley. I'm sure everybody would have seen after the first championship game this year when he had to cut off the coverage. But I think that was more about to his players, we're not letting this in. And the curious thing about Paul Joyce in post-match press conferences, or when he speaks this year, is how often he says, A, there's not many medals in the dressing room. That's a point he makes again and again, that they haven't actually lifted a huge amount of silverware. And B, that they lost 3 finals in Croke Park in 12 months. He points to that a good bit. So I think the clear theme there is that, and the thing that's been drilled up this Galway, and I think it's the reason they were going gung-ho from the start in the league, they wanted to make a league final, is that winning is a habit. That we're not going to, other teams are picking and choosing, they're telling themselves, like, I'm not, casting aspirations right in here. I thought it was very interesting that Portray said after the Roscommon game, some teams are saying the provincials doesn't mean anymore. They're only saying that to gloss over the fact that they got bet. That was what he said after that game. It was a very clear message to me that we're not saying that because we want to go and win this. So I think there's a big thing within that there still is a meaning within that dressing room in terms of getting a Connacht medal, getting a medal, winning silverware, winning point blank, like no matter what it is. I think they want to win. So yeah, I would have no fears in that respect anyway.
Yeah, and he's made it pretty clear since day one that he wanted Galway to be a seed one entering this All-Ireland series. But when you think of it now, Galway going in as raging hot favourites. Sligo will probably see it as a free shot in certain aspects. Everyone's writing them off. They have nothing to lose. They'll probably have targeted certain periods in this game. I'm sure the first 15 is something they're going to go after. But how do you see it going?
I think the initial phases will be closer than some people might think. I think is a spread 12 points that I read at today. Or I'd imagine it's in around that anyway, if that's not quite the figure. But it could end up in around that towards the end. But for the initial stages, I think it could say good and cagey. I don't think there'll be a huge burst or anything like that. Like as I say, I don't think Sligo will run out of gas. But just the fact that Galway have as many options as they do, I don't think they'll give. The one thing you don't want to do is give a team easy avenues into a game. So you mentioned that if you try a couple of long balls and then suddenly you've got a counter attack and you're left open on the flip side of that. I'd say Galway would be very conscious not to do that, to be kind of controlled, just strangle this from the very first moment, to give them no kind of easy wins, slowly strangle it and take it from there. So I think that it'll be kind of a clinical dismantling, if you want to call it that.
Just finally as well, Maurice, Warwick in the press conference before the Roscommon game, he did mention if there was anyone standing out from the 20s that they particularly have a look at. Is there anyone you'd be eager to get into this squad from the 20s? Like you're obviously not thinking that they're going to come in from the 20s, break into the seniors and have a massive impact, but to just get them in that setup and used to senior intercounty football.
Killian O'Carroll for me anyway. I think we played Comortis with the club 3 weeks ago, went extra time, and he was sensational that day. He's been an absolute rock for the 20s all year. I thought he was brilliant in that kind of final again. So I think, but on your wider point, there's a lot to be said for what you're getting at there, which is just exposing them to the setup. And I think that's why I notice some people aren't as big fans of it. I think the development squad is a very laudable idea because it is guys who might be able to make that step up, and with the fact that they have that like a halfway house to get to that point, I think that's a good idea. Even if it's just a figurative thing, even if it's just the fact that you have guys in that kind of mind frame to put in the work and make that step. And in a similar vein, I think there's no harm in getting guys exposed to the level and take that step up. It's kind of for the last couple of years we've been hearing people say, oh, you have to be exposed to intercounty football to make the step up, and then you watch the performances of someone like John Maher, who hasn't been around the intercounty setup for 2 years, and he looks like he's been primed for it. And so I don't know, maybe that defies the logic that we hear, but I still do think there's a benefit of getting a guy within that, getting exposed to it. I totally get that. I don't necessarily, I'm not saying we'll even see them this year, but just to get that kind of element of exposure, I think there's no harm in that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what any players be drafted in. But that's all on our Connacht Preview show for today. Thanks very much for your time, Maurice.
Thanks, Paul.
The Backdoor GAA Podcast for 2023 is now brought to you by Steede Motor Group. For your personalised vehicle shopping experience, visit steedemotorgroup.ie. We are now delighted to announce our second sponsor of the podcast. Harper Finlay are a professional service recruitment company operating nationwide and are dedicated to helping people find their dream job.